The strange invitation. Ethan sat alone in the dimly lit control room of Deep Space Research Station Vega 9. The hum of computers and the occasional flicker of a dying ceiling light were the only signs of life. It was a quiet, routine night, until his screen glowed with an unexpected message. The message was in a language he had never seen before. Strange symbols moved across the screen, shifting and rearranging themselves. His heart pounded. No one should be able to send a message directly to this station. It was a secure, isolated facility on the edge of human-explored space. Only top-level scientists and military personnel had access. The symbols stopped moving, and suddenly, they transformed into clear, readable English. "Meet me at the edge of the galaxy. I want to talk." Ethan frowned. Who could have sent this? And why would they be so vague? He checked the signal source. His breath caught in his throat. The transmission had come from Velkera, a planet ruled by the Xelthari, an advanced alien species. Ethan knew about them. Everyone did. The Xelthari were one of the most intelligent species in the galaxy, but they had strict rules. They did not form relationships with humans. They did not trade with humans. Most importantly, they did not trust humans. So why was one of them inviting him? Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He should report this to his supervisor. But something held him back. Curiosity. A deep, gnawing need to know why. A second message appeared. "Do not tell anyone. Come alone." Ethan shivered. This was starting to feel like a trap. But something inside him whispered, "Go. You may never get a chance like this again." He looked around the room. The station was quiet. His shift was almost over. If he left now, no one would notice for hours. He took a deep breath and made his decision. A dangerous journey. Stealing a ship from Vega 9 wasn't easy. Every spacecraft was tracked, monitored, and locked behind layers of security. But Ethan wasn't just a scientist. He was an engineer. He knew exactly how to bypass the system. Within 20 minutes, he had overridden the security codes of a small reconnaissance ship. He climbed inside, heart pounding. If anyone discovered what he was doing, he would lose everything. His job, his career, maybe even his freedom. But he couldn't turn back now. The ship's engine hummed to life, and with a careful hand, he guided it away from the station. No alarms, no alerts. So far, so good. He set his coordinates for Velkera and engaged the hyperdrive. Velkera, the forbidden planet. Hours later, Ethan's ship dropped out of hyperspace. Velkera hung before him like a blue and purple jewel, its surface covered in glowing forests and shimmering oceans. He had seen pictures before, but nothing compared to seeing it with his own eyes. His ship's sensors beeped, warning him of restricted airspace. A message flashed on his screen. "Warning. No human ships permitted. Turn back immediately." Ethan's hands tightened on the controls. If the Xelthari caught him before he even landed, this mission would be over before it started. He pushed forward, skimming the edge of the planet's atmosphere. Suddenly, another message appeared on his screen. "Follow these coordinates. Land quickly. Do not hesitate." New landing coordinates. Someone was guiding him. Ethan didn't have time to think. He adjusted his course and descended toward the surface. The moment he entered the atmosphere, he felt the ship shake violently. Something was interfering with the controls. Alarms blared. The ship spiraled downward. "Damn it, hold together." Ethan gritted his teeth, wrestling with the controls. With seconds to spare, he'd regained control and managed to land, hard, on an isolated patch of land near a glowing river. Smoke filled the cockpit. Ethan coughed and unstrapped himself. He had made it. But as he stepped out of the ship, he realized he wasn't alone. The mysterious alien. A tall figure stood at the edge of the landing site. The alien's silver eyes shimmered under the dim violet sky. Its smooth blue-tinted skin reflected the planet's light. Ethan's breath caught. He had never seen a Xelthari this close before. The alien stepped forward. "You are Ethan." It wasn't a question. It knew who he was. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "And you are?" The Xelthari studied him for a moment. Then, in perfect English, it said, "I am Villara. I brought you here because I have questions about humans, about something your kind calls love." Ethan's mind spun. Love? Why would an emotionless alien race care about something like that? Before he could ask, the ground beneath them trembled. Villara's silver eyes darkened. "They know you are here." Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a secret meeting anymore. Now, it was a race against time. First contact, but not what he expected. Ethan barely had time to process Villara's words before the ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't a natural shake. Something was coming. His instincts screamed at him to move, but Villara remained still, her silver eyes locked onto his. "We must leave," she said, voice calm but firm. Ethan hesitated for only a second before nodding. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but one thing was clear. He was in danger, and she was his only chance of survival. Villara turned and moved swiftly, her tall form gliding effortlessly over the terrain. Ethan jogged behind her, his boots sinking slightly into the strange, soft ground. The sky above them was an endless swirl of deep purples and electric blues, as if the universe itself was alive here. Behind them, the trembling grew stronger, and Ethan risked a glance back. His breath hitched. In the distance, dark, mechanical figures emerged from the shadows. Their sleek, insect-like bodies moved unnaturally fast, and their glowing red eyes locked onto him with deadly precision. "What are those?" he gasped, picking up his pace. "Enforcers," Villara answered without looking back. "They enforce the old ways. They do not tolerate outsiders. And right now, they are here to eliminate you." Ethan didn't need any more motivation to run faster. A hidden path. Villara led him to what looked like a dead end, a towering rock wall stretching high into the alien sky. Ethan's pulse raced. They were trapped. "They're getting closer," he warned, his voice tense. Villara reached out, her fingers tracing a pattern against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep rumble, the rock shifted, revealing a narrow entrance barely big enough for them to slip through. "Hurry." Ethan wasted no time. He squeezed inside, and Villara followed, sealing the entrance behind them just as the enforcers reached the area. The passage inside was dimly lit by an eerie bioluminescent glow coming from the walls. Ethan took a shaky breath, trying to steady himself. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "You bring me here. Ask me about love, and now I'm being hunted by killer machines." Villara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I will explain. But first, we must keep moving." Ethan clenched his jaw, but nodded. He didn't have many options. The forbidden truth. The tunnel led them deep underground, into a vast chamber filled with technology Ethan had never seen before. Towering screens displayed streams of alien text, and strange, floating orbs pulsed with light. Villara walked to one of the consoles and placed her hand on it. A holographic display appeared, showing a map of the planet with several red markers blinking ominously. "They will search for you," she said, "but they will not find you here. This place is hidden from them." Ethan exhaled. "Good. Now talk. Why did you bring me here?" Villara hesitated. "Because I need to understand something that does not exist among my kind." She turned to face him fully. "I need to understand emotions." Ethan blinked. "Emotions? What do you mean?" "My people do not feel as humans do. We do not love. We do not grieve. We do not experience joy or sadness. Our society has functioned this way for centuries. Logic and efficiency are all that matter." Ethan crossed his arms. "And yet, here you are, asking me about love." Villara's gaze flickered, just for a moment. "Because something is changing, and I am at the center of it." Ethan leaned against the console, trying to process everything. You're telling me an entire species just doesn't feel? That's impossible. Every intelligent race has emotions. Velara shook her head. Not the Excel theory. Emotions were eliminated from us generations ago. Genetic modifications, mental conditioning. It was seen as the path to ultimate enlightenment. Ethan frowned. That's insane. Emotions are part of what make a species grow. Without them, how do you build relationships? How do you inspire change? Velara's expression was unreadable. We do not build relationships. And change is dangerous. Ethan scoffed. So why are you different? Velara hesitated, and that's when Ethan realized something. She was different. She had called him here. She had saved him. She had taken a risk. Something an emotionless species would never do. Velara wasn't just studying emotions. She was feeling them. Ethan's pulse quickened. You already know what emotions are, don't you? Velara stiffened, but didn't deny it. I have glimpsed them. Flashes of something I do not understand. And that is why I need you. To teach me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. You brought me all this way, nearly got me killed, because you want me to give you a lesson on human emotions. Yes. Ethan sighed. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But also fascinating. He studied Velara for a moment, taking in the way her silver eyes held a quiet intensity. All right, he said finally. But you have to answer one question first. Velara tilted her head. What is it? Ethan stepped closer. Why? Why do you care about emotions now? Velara hesitated, then finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Because my people are dying. Ethan's breath caught. What? Our species is fading. Our will to survive is weakening. It is as if, without emotions, we have lost the desire to continue. If we do not change, we will cease to exist within the next century. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. Velara's people had removed emotions to make themselves stronger, but now, they were collapsing from within. And for some reason, she believed that a human like him could help her fix it. Before Ethan could respond, an alarm blared. The screens around them flashed red. Velara's eyes darkened. They have found us. Ethan clenched his fists. Lesson or not, he had a feeling this was about to turn into the fight of his life. The forbidden experiment. The alarm screamed through the underground chamber, their shrill echoes bouncing off the metallic walls. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as Velara moved quickly to the control panel, her silver fingers flying over glowing alien symbols. They found us faster than I expected, she murmured, her voice strangely calm despite the flashing red warnings. Ethan clenched his fists. Yeah, well, forgive me if I don't find that comforting. Velara turned to him, her gaze sharp and unreadable. We must leave. Now. The urgency in her voice told him everything. They were out of time. But Ethan wasn't ready to leave just yet. The hidden truth. As Velara activated a series of commands on the console, Ethan took a step toward her. You still haven't told me the whole story, he said, his voice firm. Velara's hands paused midair. Ethan continued. You said your people are dying. That emotions were erased long ago. But you never told me why you're different, why you're suddenly questioning everything. That Selthari woman hesitated. The glowing screens cast flickering lights against her smooth skin, making her seem almost human. Finally, she spoke. Because I was part of the experiment. Ethan frowned. What experiment? Velara exhaled, the sound soft, but weighted. A secret project, a forbidden one. A group of us, scientists, thinkers, outliers, wanted to understand what had been lost. We studied ancient records, examined the remnants of what emotions used to be in our kind. She met his gaze, but studying wasn't enough. We needed a subject, someone to feel again. Ethan's breath caught. You? Velara nodded. I volunteered. He stared at her, shock rolling through him like a tidal wave. You chose this. You let them, what? Reintroduce emotions into you? Not exactly. Valera's voice was low. We could not simply reintroduce something that had been erased over thousands of years. But we found something. A fragment. A tiny piece of genetic memory, buried so deep it had been nearly forgotten. Ethan took a slow step forward. And what happened? Valara looked away. At first, nothing. Then, something changed. She hesitated, then placed her hand over her chest, as if trying to grasp something unseen. I started feeling things I could not understand. Restlessness, curiosity, a sense of longing. Ethan's mouth went dry. And that's why you called me. Valara nodded. I needed answers. Humans, you understand emotions in a way we never could. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The pieces were falling into place now. But before he could say another word, the ceiling trembled. The enforcers were closing in. Escape into the unknown. Valara's fingers flew over the console. A section of the wall slid open, revealing the hidden passage lined with faint blue lights. Come, she commanded. This will lead us to safety. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed her into the tunnel, the entrance ceiling behind them. The moment it did, the chamber they had left behind exploded, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Holy! Ethan stumbled, grabbing the wall for support. They do not take betrayal lightly, Valara said, her tone grim. Ethan took a deep breath. Yeah, I kinda got that. They pressed on, the tunnel twisting in ways that made Ethan's head spin. The walls seemed to pulse, as if alive. What is this place? He asked. One of the last untouched remnants of ancient Seltheri design, Valara explained. Before our kind erased emotions, we built differently. We shaped our world with thought and intention. This place responds to us. Ethan reached out and touched the smooth, glowing wall. He could almost feel a hum beneath his fingertips. Then why abandon it? Valara's expression darkened. Because a world built on emotions was seen as weak. Ethan shook his head. And now your species is dying. Valara didn't reply. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a massive underground chamber. Ethan's eyes widened at the sight before him. It was a hidden city. Tall structures with flowing, organic shapes reached toward the cavern ceiling, glowing with soft, pulsing light. Bridges arched over rivers of luminescent liquid. Strange vehicles floated silently along invisible pathways. And in the streets below, there were Seltheri. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Valara led him forward, and the moment they stepped into the open, all eyes turned toward them. Ethan tensed. Should I be worried? Valara's gaze swept over the gathered crowd. No, they are like me. They are the outliers, the ones who feel. Ethan's stomach flipped. A whole underground society of Seltheri who had defied their own kind to reclaim emotions. This was bigger than he had imagined. The first lesson. Valara led him to a circular platform in the center of the city. The Seltheri in the crowd whispered among themselves, their silver eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and something else. Hope. Ethan wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but he was in too deep to turn back now. Valara faced him. You came here for answers. But now, I ask something of you. Ethan crossed his arms. Yeah, and what's that? Valara studied him for a long moment before speaking. Teach me what it means to be human. Ethan blinked. You want me to teach you emotions? Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. Absolutely insane. But as he looked at Valara, the first of her kind to willingly open herself to the unknown, he realized something. She had already taken the first step. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her take the next one. Ethan took a deep breath. All right, he said. Lesson 1. Let's start with something simple. Valara tilted her head. What is it? He smirked. It's called trust. A dangerous escape. Ethan barely had time to process Valara's words before a deep rumble shook the underground city. Dust rained from the cavern's ceiling, and a low mechanical hum filled the air. The enforcers had found them. The once quiet streets of the hidden city erupted into chaos. Seltheri citizens, their glowing silver eyes wide with alarm, hurried into the shadows. Some whispered in hushed tones. Others stood frozen, staring at Ethan like he was the source of all their problems. "They're here," Ethan muttered. Valara's gaze flicked toward the cavern entrance, where a wave of dark figures was already pouring in. Enforcers. Their sleek, insect-like bodies gleamed under the bioluminescent lights, and their red eyes locked onto Ethan and Valara with deadly precision. "They will not stop until we are eliminated," Valara said grimly. Ethan took a slow breath. "Yeah, I kinda figured that out already." The enforcers moved with terrifying speed. Too fast, too precise. Ethan turned to Valara. "Tell me you have a plan." Valara didn't answer with words. Instead, she grabbed Ethan's wrist and ran. The pursuit. Ethan's feet pounded against the strange, soft surface of the city's roads. Behind them, the enforcers moved like a swarm, leaping from walls, gliding over obstacles. They weren't just chasing them. They were hurting them. "We're not going to outrun them," Ethan shouted. "We do not need to," Valara said, voice calm despite the chaos. She took a sharp turn, pulling Ethan into a narrow alleyway lined with pulsing blue vines. They ducked through a nearly invisible doorway, and as soon as they stepped inside, the world around them changed. The space was dark, silent, except for the low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the walls. Ethan's breath came in quick gasps. What is this place?" "A transport chamber," Valara whispered. Ethan turned, noticing a strange circular platform at the center of the room. It pulsed with a faint glow. Symbols floated above it, shifting like liquid light. Valara's fingers danced over the control panel. The symbols flickered and rearranged. Then, suddenly, a beam of energy exploded through the doorway. Ethan barely had time to react. He dived behind the console as the room shook. The enforcers were trying to break in. "They are too fast," Ethan said. "We're out of time." Valara's silver eyes flashed with determination. "No, we still have one chance." She reached for Ethan's hand. He hesitated, then took it. Valara pulled him onto the platform. Ethan felt the ground beneath him hum with energy. The symbols in the air shifted again, turning red. "Hold on," Valara said. Ethan didn't even have time to ask why. Because the next second, the world vanished. The forgotten temple. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. The underground city was gone. The enforcers were gone. Instead, he and Valara stood in a vast, ancient hall. Towering pillars reached up toward a domed ceiling, where an eerie blue glow flickered like a dying star. The air was thick with dust, and the silence felt old. Ethan exhaled sharply. Okay, that was new. Valara stepped forward, her gaze scanning the massive chamber. "This place," she murmured, almost to herself. "It still exists." Ethan frowned. "You didn't know for sure." "I suspected," Valara admitted, "but no one has set foot here in centuries." Ethan turned in a slow circle. The room was massive. Strange symbols covered the walls, carved deep into the ancient stone. And then, at the far end of the chamber, he saw it. A single, massive structure. It looked like a throne. No, not a throne. A seat. A chair built for something, or someone, far more powerful than a ruler. Ethan swallowed. What is this place? Valara's voice was quiet. The place where emotions were lost. The origin of the Seltheri's curse. Valara approached the throne-like structure, running her fingers over its smooth surface. "This is where it began," she said, "where our ancestors made the choice to erase emotions from our kind." Ethan stepped closer. Why? Why would anyone do that? Valara's gaze darkened. Because we were once like you. Ethan froze. Valera turned to him. Long ago, we were not so different from humans. We loved. We feared. We dreamed. But war changed everything. She gestured toward the carvings on the walls. Ethan squinted at them. He saw figures locked in battle, weapons raised, entire cities consumed by flames. Our civilization nearly destroyed itself. Valera continued. We fought wars for power, for revenge, for greed. Emotions made us weak. And so, the rulers of old made a choice. She placed her hand on the throne. They created a device, a machine that would erase emotions from our genetic code. That would transform us into perfect, logical beings. Ethan stared at her. That's insane. Valera's lips pressed into a thin line. It worked. The wars ended. We became a society of peace, of order. She turned back to the throne, her silver eyes full of something Ethan had never seen before. But peace is not the same as life, she whispered. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to process everything. So what now? You brought me here. You want to change things. But how? Valera met his gaze. By undoing what was done. Ethan's pulse quickened. You're talking about reversing the process. Valera nodded. Ethan let out a slow breath. I'm guessing your government doesn't exactly support that idea. Valera gave a humorless smile. They would rather see me dead. Before Ethan could reply, a deep boom echoed through the hall. Ethan spun around. The enforcers had found them again. Valera's eyes flashed. They will destroy this place. Ethan's mind raced. So what do we do? Valera turned to the ancient throne, her expression firm. We finish what was started. She stepped forward and placed both hands on the throne. The moment she did, the entire room came to life. The symbols on the walls began to glow. The throne pulsed with energy. Ethan stumbled back as the air itself seemed to vibrate. Valera's voice rang out, clear and strong. Ethan, this is it. This is the key to everything. The enforcers surged into the room, weapons raised. Ethan's heart pounded. Whatever was about to happen, it would change the fate of an entire species. Love is the ultimate rebellion. The chamber trembled as the enforcers stormed inside, their sleek metallic bodies gleaming under the eerie blue glow of the ancient throne. Their red eyes locked onto Valera and Ethan, like predators closing in on their prey. Ethan instinctively took a step in front of Valera, shielding her. Not that it would do much good. He was just a human, unarmed and outmatched. But Valera wasn't backing down. She stood tall, hands still placed firmly on the throne, her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever. The ancient Seltheri symbols on the walls pulsed like a heartbeat, as if the room itself had awoken from a long slumber. One of the enforcers stepped forward, its voice cold and mechanical. Valera of House Selthar, you have violated the first law. Surrender now, or be erased. Valera didn't move. Her grip on the throne tightened. I will not surrender. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The enforcers raised their weapons, energy blades humming to life. This is bad, he muttered. Valera turned her head slightly, her voice calm but filled with something new. Something her kind wasn't supposed to have. Defiance. No, Ethan. This is the beginning. And then the throne came alive. The power of memory. The moment Valera fully connected with the throne, a shockwave of energy blasted outward, knocking the enforcers off their feet. The ancient symbols on the walls burned with golden light, and suddenly, Ethan wasn't standing in the chamber anymore. His vision blurred, his surroundings shifted. He felt like he was floating through time itself. And then, he saw it. The past. Ethan gasped as he watched a vision unfold before him, projected like a memory from a time long forgotten. That Seltheri were not always the cold, emotionless beings they had become. In the vision, they were alive. Their cities burned with color and movement. They laughed, they embraced, They felt. They had families, friends, love. Then the war came. Ethan watched as the Selthuri's great cities collapsed into ruin. The people, once full of passion, became desperate. Their leaders, fearing extinction, made a choice. They built the throne of silence. And on that throne, a decision was made that would alter their species forever. A single Selthuri sat upon it, the first to erase emotion from their kind. A wave of energy rippled outward, and across the world, the light in their eyes dimmed. Their expressions became blank. Their voices lost warmth. Emotions were buried, forgotten, and with them, love itself died. The vision ended abruptly. Ethan gasped, stumbling backward as he snapped back into reality. Valara stood before the throne, breathing heavily, her silver eyes flickering with 1,000 emotions at once. She had seen it too. "This is the truth," she whispered. "This is what was taken from us." Ethan's throat was dry. "Your people erased love." Valara turned toward him, her gaze burning with something he had never seen in her before. Determination. No more. The turning point. The enforcers recovered, rising to their feet, weapons aimed once more. "This is your final warning," the lead enforcer intoned. "Step away from the throne." Valara looked at them, unafraid. "For centuries, we have lived without emotions," she said. "We were told it was for our survival. That love, fear, and hope made us weak." She took a step forward, and for the first time, the enforcers hesitated. "But what if the real weakness is not feeling at all?" Valara continued. "What if our survival depends on something we abandoned?" She turned to Ethan. "You asked me why I brought you here." Ethan nodded slowly. "I brought you because humans remember what we lost," Valara said. "And I wanted to understand what it means to love, to feel." She placed her hand over her chest. "Now I do." The enforcers raised their weapons, but Valara didn't flinch. She stepped closer to Ethan, looking at him not as an experiment, not as a scientist, but as a being who could finally feel. And then, she reached out and took his hand. The first Selthuri love story. A gasp rippled through the chamber. The enforcers stood frozen. No Selthuri had ever touched a human with affection before. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. It was a simple gesture, and yet, to the Selthuri, it was a revolution. The symbols on the walls flashed brighter, reacting to what was happening. The throne of silence, built to erase emotions, now hummed with a different energy. Valara turned back to the enforcers, still holding Ethan's hand. "I will not abandon this," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "You can erase emotions, you can silence us, but you can never destroy something so fundamental to life itself." A moment of silence stretched between them. Then, something shocking happened. One of the enforcers lowered its weapon, then another, and another. A ripple of hesitation spread through them. Their red eyes flickered, almost as if something buried deep within them was awakening. For the first time in generations, the Selthuri were questioning their laws. The rebellion had begun. A new future. Suddenly, a deep, ominous voice echoed through the chamber. "You have gone too far, Valara." Ethan turned sharply. A new figure stood at the entrance. Unlike the enforcers, this one was different. Taller, more regal. Its silver eyes glowed with a cold, piercing intensity. Ethan didn't need to ask who this was. This was the sovereign, the ruler of the Selthuri. "You have infected this place with human weakness," the sovereign said. "This ends now." Ethan tensed. "What now?" he whispered to Valara. Valara exhaled. Then she turned to face the sovereign. And she smiled. "We fight," she said. Ethan grinned. "Now that's an answer I can get behind." The chamber shook as the sovereign stepped forward, power radiating from its form. The final battle had begun. And this time, Valara wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for the right to feel. The revolution begins. The chamber trembled as the sovereign stepped forward, its presence commanding. suffocating. The enforcers parted, bowing slightly as their ruler entered the ancient hall. Ethan felt the air grow heavier, thick with an invisible force, powerful, oppressive. The sovereign was unlike any cell-theory Ethan had seen before. Its form was similar to Velara's, but taller, its skin darker, like polished obsidian. Its silver eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Velara did not bow. She did not step back. She stood firm. "You have broken the law, Velara." The sovereign's voice was deep, layered, almost as if it spoke with multiple voices at once. "You have allowed human corruption to spread." Velara's fingers tightened around Ethan's hand. She did not let go. "I have done what our ancestors should have done long ago," she said. "I have remembered what they tried to erase." The sovereign's gaze flicked toward their clasped hands. "Disgusting." Ethan bristled. "Wow, you really know how to make a guy feel welcome." The enforcers tensed, but the sovereign raised a hand, stopping them. It studied Ethan, eyes narrowing. "I do not speak to insects." Ethan smirked. "Guess that makes sense. You wouldn't want to talk to something that actually understands emotions." A few of the enforcers shifted uncomfortably. Velara spoke before the sovereign could respond. "You are afraid," she said softly. The sovereign turned back to her, its gaze like a knife. "Afraid?" It let out a low, hollow chuckle. "I am the sovereign of silence. I do not fear." Velara took a step closer. "You do. I can see it." Ethan looked at her, confused. But then he noticed it too. The sovereign's hands were clenched into tight fists. Its voice had grown sharper, its posture more rigid. Velara's eyes narrowed. "You are feeling something right now, aren't you?" she whispered. The sovereign's expression darkened. "I will not let you undo what we have built," it said. Velara lifted her chin. "Then you will have to kill me." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Velara." But she didn't flinch. "If I die," she continued, voice strong, unwavering, "it will not stop what has begun. I am not the only one who remembers." She turned her gaze toward the enforcers. One by one, they shifted uncomfortably. Their weapons trembled slightly. Ethan saw it. Hesitation. For the first time in generations, they were questioning the laws they had followed blindly. Velara saw it too. And so did the sovereign. Its expression twisted into pure rage. "You will not poison them," it snarled. "I will end this madness myself." And then the sovereign attacked. A battle of willpower. Ethan barely had time to react. The sovereign moved with inhuman speed, faster than any enforcer. A shockwave of energy burst from its form, sending Velara flying. She hit the ground hard, skidding across the smooth stone floor. Ethan ran toward her, but the sovereign turned its focus on him. And in that instant, Ethan felt it. The same crushing force that filled the air pressed down on him, as if gravity had tripled. His knees buckled. His breath caught in his throat. He was being crushed by nothingness itself. The sovereign wasn't just a ruler. It was a living embodiment of the silence that had controlled the cell theory for centuries. Ethan struggled to move, to fight back. But how do you fight something that doesn't feel? A low voice whispered in his mind. "You do not belong here. You are weak. You will fade." Ethan gritted his teeth. "No," he growled. The sovereign tilted its head. "What did you say?" Ethan forced himself to stand. Every muscle in his body screamed, but he refused to fall. "I said no." The pressure intensified. But then, something changed. A hand wrapped around his. Velara, her silver eyes burned with fire. And suddenly, the pressure lifted. The sovereign staggered back. "What is this?" it hissed. Velara stepped forward. "You cannot silence something that refuses to be silenced." She held Ethan's hand tighter. And at that moment, something extraordinary happened. The walls of the ancient throne room glowed brighter than ever before. The symbols, written by the ancestors of the cell theory, shifted, rearrange. They were no longer just marks of silence. They were marks of rebirth. The Sovereign's eyes widened in horror. "No," it whispered. Valera's voice rang out. "We are not meant to be empty." The enforcers around them froze. Some clutched their heads, as if something buried deep inside them was waking up. One by one, their red eyes flickered and turned silver. Emotions were returning. The fall of the Sovereign. The Sovereign let out an inhuman roar. "I will note this." It lunged at Valara, energy crackling around its form. But this time, it was not Valara who stopped it. It was the enforcers. One by one, they turned against their own ruler. Weapons that had once been aimed at Ethan and Valara now fired at the Sovereign. Blades that had been meant to execute them now struck the one who had kept them in chains. The Sovereign screamed, writhing as the energy blasts tore through its form. Its body shuddered, collapsing to one knee. Valara walked forward, looking down at it. "You have lost," she whispered. The Sovereign lifted its gaze, hatred burning in its silver eyes. "No," it rasped. "I have only delayed the inevitable." It reached out one trembling hand. The walls shook violently. Ethan realized what was happening. The entire chamber was collapsing. Valara's eyes widened. The Sovereign was willing to destroy everything rather than accept defeat. "Go!" Valara shouted. The enforcers, now free, ran for the exits. Ethan grabbed Valara's hand, pulling her with him as the throne began to shatter. The last thing Ethan saw before they escaped was the Sovereign collapsing into the ruins, its body crumbling under the weight of its own silence. And then, everything exploded. The dawn of a new era. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was outside. The underground chamber was gone, buried beneath the weight of history. Beside him, Valara stood, her face turned toward the sky. The Seltheri resistance stood around them, their eyes no longer blank, no longer empty. For the first time in centuries, they were alive. Valara turned to Ethan. "We did it." Ethan smiled. "No, you did it." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she took his hand again. Ethan squeezed it gently, because this was no longer just about survival. This was about a new beginning. The first Seltheri love story. The air was still. For the first time in generations, the Seltheri were free. The ancient throne chamber had collapsed, burying the Sovereign of Silence beneath the ruins of its own creation. The enforcers who had once been mindless enforcers of the old law now stood among the resistance, changed. Their eyes, once cold and empty, now flickered with something new. Emotion. The weight of history had shifted, and Ethan was standing at the center of it all. The echo of the past. Valara stood beside him, her silver eyes reflecting the soft glow of Velkura's twin moons. The underground city, the last refuge of the Seltheri who had dared to feel, had been exposed to the world above. For centuries, their people had lived in silence, in logic, in a carefully constructed prison of control. Now that prison was gone. And yet, as the night stretched over the ruined landscape, no one spoke. "What now?" Ethan turned to Valara. "We won," he said. Valara's gaze did not waver. "No," she said softly. "The battle is over. But the war is just beginning." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Valara looked at the Seltheri around them, the ones who had begun to awaken. Their faces were uncertain, their expressions unfamiliar even to themselves. "We have taken the first step," Valara said, "but an entire species cannot change in a single night." Ethan exhaled. "You're saying they don't know what to do now?" Valara nodded. "They have been without emotions for so long that even the idea of them is terrifying." Ethan looked around. The Seltheri resistance, the former enforcers, the survivors, they were waiting, looking to Valara for answers, for leadership, for guidance in a world they no longer understood. The choice. Valara took a slow breath. "We cannot force emotions upon them," she said. That would be no different from what the sovereign did to us. Ethan frowned. Then what do we do? Villara turned her gaze toward the ruins of the throne chamber. We teach them. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Teach them what? Villara met his gaze. What it means to feel. Ethan's stomach twisted. Villara, that could take generations. Yes, she said, but it has to start somewhere. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. And you think you're the one who should do it? Villara hesitated. For the first time since he had met her, she looked uncertain. No, she admitted. I do not think I am ready. Ethan sighed. Then who? Villara tilted her head. She was looking at him. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh no, he said. No, no, no. Villara took a step closer. You are the only human who has ever set foot here. Ethan shook his head. That doesn't mean I'm qualified to teach an entire civilization how to. What? Love. Yes. Ethan opened his mouth to argue. Then he closed it. Because, deep down, he knew Villara was right. Someone had to be the bridge between their worlds. And right now, he was the only one who could do it. The first lesson. The Seltheri had gathered around them. Their faces were expectant, confused. Villara took Ethan's hand again, this time not as an experiment, not as a rebellion, but as a symbol. Tell them, she whispered. Tell them what love is. Ethan swallowed hard. He had never given much thought to it before. What was love? A word, a feeling, a choice. He looked at Villara, at the way she was looking at him, at the way her silver eyes held something new, something raw. And suddenly, he knew. It's not one thing, Ethan said, turning to face the Seltheri crowd. It's many things. He took a deep breath. Love is trust, he began. It's standing beside someone even when the world is against them. The Seltheri murmured among themselves. Some looked at each other, as if trying to process the words. Love is sacrifice, Ethan continued. It's fighting for someone even when you're afraid. Villara's fingers tightened around his. Ethan's voice grew softer. And sometimes, love is just holding someone's hand and knowing you're not alone. The Seltheri were silent. Then one of the former enforcers, a being who had once been incapable of feeling, slowly reached out and took the hand of the Seltheri beside them. A ripple spread through the crowd. One by one, more of them did the same. Some hesitated. Others trembled, uncertain, unfamiliar with the touch. But they felt it. For the first time in history, the Seltheri were not machines of logic. They were a people learning to feel again. The first Seltheri love story. Villara turned back to Ethan. You asked me once why I brought you here, she said. Ethan nodded. Villara's silver eyes softened. I did not understand it then, she admitted. But I do now. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And why's that? Villara took a step closer. It was because of you. Ethan's breath caught. Me. Villara nodded. You changed everything. Not just for my people, but for me. She hesitated. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, she lifted a hand and gently touched his face. A gasp rippled through the Seltheri crowd. Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel the warmth of her fingers against his skin, soft, hesitant, but real. I have studied emotions, Villara whispered. I have tried to understand them, but no lesson could teach me what I have learned just now. Ethan swallowed. And what's that? Villara's voice was barely above a breath. Love is not something to be studied. She leaned closer. It is something to be felt. And for the first time in history, a Seltheri kissed a human. The future begins. The Seltheri civilization had begun a new chapter. No longer ruled by logic alone, no longer imprisoned by the laws of the past, they stood on the edge of something new, unknown, terrifying, and beautiful. And Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Villara smiled at him. Aliens don't date, she whispered. Ethan grinned. Yeah, Velora's silver eyes sparkled with warmth. "But I'll make an exception for you.